Thanks for joining us for another episode of Conversations and Connections, the official podcast of the Family Crisis Center of East Texas. I'm Stuart Burson. I'm the prevention coordinator for the agency. And with me today, I have one of our counselors, Carrel King. And I kind of thought it would be a timely topic in light of things that have happened within the past month, the flooding in the Hill Country in the Kerrville area, to talk to one of our counselors about children dealing with grief and tragedy and things like that. So, Carrel, first of all, thank you, because I know this is not it's not a fun topic, but I do appreciate you doing this. And and I kind of thought, well, in a way, I think it's almost the children of our clients are dealing in their own way tragedy and grief and things like that. If their parents are having issues and things like that. So I thought this might be a fitting topic to talk about. So I guess, Carrel, the first thing I want to, touch on is what's the best way for a parent, a teacher, to start a conversation with a child about a tragic event that they may hear about, even if they're not directly involved in the event. Like the floods. Even if a child was not actually there,
right?
Kids are hearing about it.
Right.
If
they
not,
can imagine.
And they can imagine things. And I'm sure kids are talking in their own circles at school or whatever about something like this. So. Again, so what's the best way to kind of to open up a conversation about this with a child?
Well, that is the question. I mean, open questions are the best way to go. So the difference between an open question and a closed question is that an open question gives you more than a yes or no answer. So like instead of asking, how are you doing? Or not, you ask, how are you doing? But like, trying to think of an example.
Right.
But
well, I can't tell you the closed questions are the interviewer's worst nightmare.
Right. Yeah. Anything that would generate a yes or no answer is a closed question. You don't want to start there. So ask, what have you heard? Starting where they are, not giving them more information than they already have. Ask what they've heard. Ask how they're feeling. Kind of get a sense of where they are before starting in with what you want to do with helping them through it, Right.
So. Yeah, well, and I just think of, again, it's such a broad, the question can cover such a broad topic, either kids directly involved in tragedy, a local tragedy, or something they hear on the news, or a personal, like I was saying, dealing with...
they may know because they were there, and asking them, what do you know, may generate a different perspective than you were expecting, because the parents may have a different perspective on it than the child would have.
Sure.
So their answers may surprise you or be different than you were expecting.
Well, and then I even think with small children, how are they going to deal with the next time it rains? When we have, or if they hear on the news, even us here in Angelina or Nacogdoches counties, hey, we're under a flash flood watch, we're under a flash flood warning.
Those triggers are
what
important.
is that going to bring to mind to a child? I'm sure they're going to think of something can happen like what happened in Kerrville.
Yeah, and triggers are, sometimes they're obvious like that, and sometimes they're not so obvious. Our brains, the part of our brain that encodes trauma isn't really rational like that. So it might be something you didn't even think of that is triggering them, So just being aware that triggers are not necessarily rational.
Sure.
So finding that out would be helpful.
So when you are talking with a child, are there any specific phrases or words that maybe you should avoid?
Being overly graphic, you don't want to be overly graphic with children for sure. Don't do that. Euphemisms are not something you should use, like passed away or that kind of thing. Like if somebody died, use the word death. that is understandable to a child, or maybe not. I mean, this may be their first experience
Yeah.
hearing about anything about death, and that may be something that opens a conversation about that. But don't use euphemisms, because kids are very literal, and they won't understand what you're trying to say.
And you may have
you're trying
good
to be
intent,
gentle,
right?
But that's not going to help them understand. So they need honesty and truthfulness and directness, but not graphic detail or more than they can handle. It needs to be like child-friendly, child-appropriate, that kind of language. So, and also avoid things that are dismissive. Like, don't say things like, "Oh, it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. It's all good." Make sure you acknowledge the tragedy as being a tragedy, and their feelings about it are legitimate.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you're talking to a child, you may think you're being helpful or easing the pain if you do use euphemisms, if you do use the term passed away.
Right.
And I think we got to realize, well, to a child, they may not comprehend what you're trying to tell them,
because they're very literal and they don't understand that language yet. So and I mean, that's also something to consider if you're talking to somebody who's neurodivergent, someone who might be on the spectrum or something also that's very literal. So you got to be aware.
I guess, we've kind of touched on this, but, how honest should you be? Is it okay to say something like, if they have a question, to say, I don't know. If you don't know the answer to a question, to say, I don't know.
Yeah. Don't be honest. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Honesty really is the most appropriate thing, as long as you don't go overboard telling them all the graphic details of everything that happened. Keep it age appropriate.
Sure.
So. Yeah, and they may have, cell phone usage is huge now, and kids who are pretty young have access to the internet, and they may have heard a lot already. So,
well, and that's kind of what I was thinking whenever I was trying to construct some questions to ask you. When I was a child, or probably even when you were a child, we didn't have access to things like that, so it was just word of mouth or what we heard on TV when we were at home. And now, even when I work with kids and I ask them, I'm talking about little kids, how many of y'all have a cell phone? Well, probably maybe half of them.
Yeah.
Now, are they honest about it? I don't know. But I have a feeling that a lot of parents probably allow their kids to have some sort of media device at a young age. And, what does that open up?
Yeah, I mean, they might be hearing things and seeing things they don't understand or they don't get, and it can be very frightening. And when I was a kid, like you said, I watched the news with my parents. So if we saw something on the news that was disturbing, they were right there to field my questions if I had any, And now, with the internet, it's everywhere. News is 24/7. You don't have that hour of time where you process it together,
Yeah.
And it's just, you kind of have to figure out what they know. So I'm asking those open-ended questions.
Sure.
And kind of seeing, how did you find out about this is a good question maybe to ask.
Okay. What about, obviously, talking to the child, but what are some other strategies to help? I'm thinking of things, journaling, art, reading. What would you suggest for a parent or a caregiver to help a child process
for sure
tragedy or grief?
A lot of times kids don't have the language to really process what they've seen or heard. They don't have the words, the vocabulary, or the mental capacity to do that. And a lot of times trauma will kind of get lodged in their bodies, so somatically. So helping them move their bodies and play can really help people. If they choose to play a game about the flood, let them. That's their way of coping and their way of processing it. So it may seem disturbing to you and upsetting to you to watch them play a game about, putting the little toys down and watching them flood, but that may be their only way of really processing or verbalizing it. Also, journaling is great if they are able to do that, if they're old enough to do that. That's not really a thing for little kids, but art is also fantastic. Drawing pictures, that's another way of processing that's not necessarily verbal, because talking isn't really the best way with children. If they can cope with, if they do have the vocabulary, it's good, but if they don't, other things like that will help. Also, there's a great book that I run across here at the Family Crisis Center several times, and I've used with clients. It's called A Terrible Thing Happened by Margaret Holmes. That is just a great book about it's like a little raccoon child that has something happen that he sees that's really terrible. And the book kind of goes through the process of how, at first he denies that it happened, but then it starts to come out anyway. He starts to be mean to people because he can't process it, and he's mad about what's happening, and he's sad. And he ends up going to a counselor, and they do things like art therapy and talk about it. And it's just a great book that illustrates how trauma plays out for a child.
Yeah.
And it's for children, but I think it also is helpful for parents to kind of see this is what happens. This is the process you can go through.
What kind of boundaries do we need to maybe draw, or is there a balance, maybe I should say, that we should practice between informing and protecting children from exposure to trauma or events in the news? You did say you want to be honest with them and be, not use euphemisms or things like that. But what's the line? Are there some things that we should keep from a child or try to limit their exposure?
Yeah. I think you got to ask yourself, what do they already know? What do they need to know, and are they ready to hear it? And a lot of times, like we've talked about before, they either already know or that they're going to encounter this information somewhere, and it coming from you as a parent or caregiver is a much better way of giving them that information than them running across it by themselves or coming across it through a friend, So just, if you think that it's something they're not going to encounter anyway, it doesn't have anything to do with their lives, they don't need to know, they're not able to handle it, I think some protection is appropriate. But if you think they're going to know about it anyway, because everyone is talking about it, it's better to come from you than someone else. Right.
When should maybe a parent turn to professional counseling for their child? Instead of trying to, just dealing with it yourself, when would be the appropriate time to say, hey, maybe we need to take this a step further?
Yeah, if the child is starting to show signs of not being able to function, if they're not sleeping, if they're not able to do the things that they need to do in their lives, if they're becoming to the point where they're kind of coming unraveled, that really is a good time to get some professional help in addition to what you're already doing. And if the child requests help, that's also a good sign that they need help as well. Because a lot of kids do know counseling exists now. So they may be like, hey, I think I need to be in counseling about this. And that's,
almost feel like what you just said, that's almost a very positive thing to acknowledge that your child is aware of this, that they do need extra help.
Yeah. But if their behaviors are becoming a problem, if their sleep patterns are becoming a problem, that's a pretty good sign that they're needing extra help.
Yeah. And, we've kind of touched on this also, but, with technology today, do you feel kids are more exposed to news about tragic events than they used to be? And is it harder to protect, I guess, lack for a better word, the innocence of our children with
for sure.
media access we have today?
Yeah, and I don't mean to, drop too many names of books, but...
Oh, hey, go for it.
Jonathan Haidt wrote a book a while back called The Coddling of the American Mind, and he talks a lot about how, we give kids not enough exposure to real life, real exposure to real risk, and too much exposure to risk online. Like, we've kind of reversed what we should be doing, and he, advocates for keeping cell phones away from kids, or especially social media, until they're 16, just because of the way that it affects brains that are developing. And, I know that seems extreme to a lot of us because, kids have phones so early now, but I do think that maybe our culture needs to rethink children's access to technology.
Well, and this is maybe going off topic just a little bit, but I always take pause and think, if I'm out and about somewhere at the store or at a restaurant, and you see a parent with their little child, and the child's even young enough to be sitting in the shopping cart, and they have an iPad. Yeah. And they're not, this kid isn't even aware of what's going on around them. Their eyes are glued to that phone or to that iPad when they're with their parents out and about somewhere. And I just, I guess I kind of see that it is a good pacifier, maybe, or I don't know how to describe that, but at the same time, I don't know. I just kind of have an issue with that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a missed opportunity for connection for that parent.
Yeah.
That they could have used to connect and interact with their child.
Yeah.
And that connection is so important just because, tragedy does happen. And when that happens, your kid needs to know you're going to be there and you're going to be paying attention.
Yeah.
Because if they don't know that, they may experience these tragedies and hear about them, and they won't come to you because they're so used to coming to their phone for comfort.
Right.
And that's not really the best way for them to handle it.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Carrel, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you feel like listeners would need to know?
No, I think we covered pretty much everything.
Well, I really do appreciate, everybody. I have a feeling sometimes in the office when they see Stuart at their office door, they're like, "Oh God, he's going to want me. He's wanting me to be on the podcast." But Carrel, I do. You've been on the podcast before. I really do appreciate your opinion and your willingness to come on here and share all of this. Carrel King, she's one of the counselors here at the Family Crisis Center, talking about children. How to talk to kids dealing with grief and tragedy and things like that. And I always like to remind people, if you feel like you need the services of the Family Crisis Center, you can call our 24-hour hotline. That's 1-800-828-7233. And, of course, we would appreciate you to subscribe to Conversations and Connections via Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or the podcast service of your choice. Remember, as always, be the voice, if not for you, for someone else.